we're going to be speaking to Paul Knightley. Now, Paul has had a really deep interest in the weather since he was a child, thanks to the January 1987 cold spell, the October 1987 Great Storm, both big events that sparked his interest. The interest continued to develop. In May 1998, Paul undertook his first storm chasing trip to the USA, the first of 19 visits to date, and possibly even more coming up. During that time, he developed quite a few skills in photographing extreme weather events, as you might well imagine. He works at DTN as a senior weather risk manager. He's the head of the tornado and research organisation Toro, so he's the man who'll know whether or not we've seen any tornadoes of late in the UK. And he's also a fellow of the Royal Meteorological Society and a chartered meteorologist. Paul, over to you.
Thanks very much, Kirsty, and good evening, everyone, or whatever time of day it is, wherever you're watching this in the world. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully that is sharing that all nicely, and just get my thing up on screen there. So yeah, thank you very much, Kirsty, and thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm going to run through quite a lot of photographs. I'm going to get on with it, just because I'm sure you want to see a few pictures of mine. Maybe you don't. Hopefully you do. So I'm going to just quickly. Kirsty gave me a very comprehensive introduction there, so I'll just briefly touch on my experiences of taking photos with the weather. Then we're going to get on to storm chasing, why I do it, and some images from that. And that's going to be in the types of extreme weather, really. That's where I'm going to show you a lot of images of tornadoes, lightning and thunderstorms in general. A few safety tips, but I think as long as people are sensible about what they're doing, you don't need me to lecture you really on safety tips. But there's one or two things that can be borne in mind. And then using a phone's camera. We just heard from Alistair there about people viewing images more and more on phones. The fact that society has put a mobile phone category into the photographic competition shows that increasingly many of us are using those to capture images of all sorts of aspects of life, and it's quite handy actually, because sometimes the weather throws up some amazing images, as we saw from Laura earlier on, at times where you probably perhaps aren't lugging your camera equipment around and you just happen to take a great photograph with your phone. So I'm just going to touch on that briefly. Who am I? So as Kirsty said there, I've been interested in weather and storms for a very long time, and I've been storm chasing actually 19 times to the central USA. And this picture of me taken here was back in 2015 in a town called Canadian in Texas. And that was a tornado in the background there, just as it was beginning to what we call rope out. So it had been through its sort of more mature phase and it was on its way out. But we saw a further 3 or 4 smaller tornadoes, or briefer tornadoes, I should say, that occurred after this, but this was the sort of the main event. I have travelled into the USA more recently, just a week ago, so I'm going to come to that right at the end of this talk. But let's go straight into storm chasing. And when I was asked to talk this evening, I was asked to talk a little bit about storm chasing and also perhaps the preconceptions that it's a dangerous hobby. It can be, but let's put it into a little bit of context. So primarily storm chasing takes place. You can do it anywhere really where there's a reasonable road network, where if you have a vehicle and there are some storms to chase. So people quite frequently chase storms here in the UK, for example. It is more challenging. Our road network is dense but busy. The storms are not necessarily that frequent, and if they are, the storm never slows down for traffic lights or roundabouts, so you always have to really have a good way of keeping up with the storm. But primarily storms occur when we go storm chasing. This is the area that if we're traveling to the USA we're most likely to target. That's not to say that tornadoes are not common further elsewhere, especially to the east of this area, through parts of Arkansas, the Mississippi Valley. Some of the deadliest tornadoes and most common tornadoes actually occur in that part of the states, but the chasing terrain is much more challenging. Lots of woods and forests, much more windy roads. So the Great Plains out to the west afford wide open views, broadly a good road network as well, but the key thing is being able to see the storms. The air is often, the relative humidity is somewhat lower in this part of the USA on average, so the storms tend to be more visually spectacular. Everyone has their own idea of what they want to chase and see. From my point of view, I want to see storms out on the open prairie with the flatlands around, vast skies, and being able to see the storms from a long way away. But talking about the safety aspect, if we have an upper trough coming in from the west, a quick bit of meteorology for you. So this could be the position of the jet stream, let's say on a May afternoon. Low pressure tends to form to the lee of the Rocky Mountains due to downslope warming. That causes the air to become lighter and more buoyant, so low pressure might form there. At the surface, this will feed in some warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico, the fuel for thunderstorms, if you will. At the same time, drier, hotter air from the southwest may spread in from parts of New Mexico. You kind of get a boundary where these different air masses are joining. So you might have a warm front on the nose of the warm, moist air from the south, and you may have what we call a dry line, a boundary between dry, hot air to the west and warmer, moister air to the east, which can form. And thunderstorms might form along both of these boundaries on a typical day. So if you're planning your chase on a particular day, this might be an area that you want to target. And somewhere within that, there might be one or two tornadoes developing. Let's just have a look at the size that we're talking about here. The blue area there, I did a little bit of working out using some mapping software. It's about 75,000 square miles. So that's pretty big. The UK is 93,000 or 94,000 square miles, including all the islands. England, just for context, 50,000 square miles. So already we're targeting an area larger than England to try and find what on average, an average tornado has about 0.03 square mile footprint. So maybe 1 or 2 mile path, 50 to 100 yards wide. So as you can see, actually finding a tornado for that to then be dangerous to you is quite difficult. And actually the most dangerous part of storm chasing is the driving. In fact, that's one of the most dangerous things any of us do any day of the week, is to get into our cars and drive. So by far and away, the most dangerous aspect of storm chasing is the driving. But let's talk about the extreme weather. And of course, the weather can be dangerous, especially if you get in the way of it. So I'm going to show you different photographs that I've taken through the years of storm chasing: tornadoes, lightning, thunderstorms, cloudscapes, and hail, and maybe just one or two pointers about capturing these events. I should say I'm not a photographer. I wouldn't even class myself really as an experienced amateur photographer. I just enjoy capturing these pictures, and I've tried to pick up some tips and tricks along the way. But I guess there are many more experienced photographers watching this than I am. So please forgive me if I'm trying to teach you to suck eggs in this case. This was a tornado back in May 2011 near a place called Canton in Oklahoma. And I'm going to show you a couple of images of this as we talk about it. This was on a high-risk day of severe weather, as classified by the Storm Prediction Center in the USA. And this was one of many big tornadoes that developed that day. This was eventually rated as an EF3. Sadly, there was a fatality with this tornado as it affected a kind of campground as it moved along. It was impressive to see, but it's always very sobering, of course, to see or hear about the damage, and especially the injuries or deaths that a tornado causes. And that's one of the aspects, of capturing any kind of impactful event on humanity, that there's going to be some tragedy perhaps along the way as well. There was also a really powerful EF5 tornado occurred near a town called El Reno. Not another El Reno tornado, which we'll talk about in a minute, but this was a very powerful tornado on that day. When I was younger, my romantic view of storm chasing in the States was a tornado with a row of power poles running away from me, let's say, as the photographer. And back in 2012 in central Kansas, near a town called Russell, around about sunset, that's what I managed to capture in this photograph here. So this is perhaps one of my most, one of the images I'm happiest with, I guess, in a way that it kind of gives me the view that I imagined that I might one day see as a younger boy, looking about going storm chasing in the plains. A few minutes later, the tornado did this amazing rope out, as we call it. And the shape of the tornado here is actually guided by the cool outflow from the storm. So it actually manages to move the vortex around a little bit. And that's often what kind of guides the tornado, especially in these contorted shapes towards the end. I'll speed up a bit now with a few other tornadoes. This was on the same day, but at night. So maybe about 9 o'clock or so at night, deeper into the middle of Kansas, near a place called La Crosse. There was 5 or 6 tornadoes from a different supercell thunderstorm, and I managed to capture a couple of those, lit up purely by the lightning. This is obviously when it can be quite a bit more dangerous, so you have to keep situational awareness and working out where the storm is at that point. This was a big tornado in 2013 near a place called Bennington in Kansas, EF3. It stayed stationary for about 45 minutes. A lot of people got much closer shots than this. We kind of hung back a little bit from this tornado, but we still managed to capture this distant view of the tornado. I put this view in because there's a little bit historic. This is near a town called El Reno in Oklahoma on May the 31st, 2013. And about 2 hours after this image of me was taken by the GoPro that I had mounted on the front of the car. Actually, I think my partner might have taken this, I can't remember. But about 2 hours later, the largest recorded tornado in history moved down this road, and of course in the area around it. It was 2.6 miles wide, I think, at its widest, or 0.7. And you can see those clouds sort of in the distance there, leaning over in response to the strong vertical wind shear. We managed to see that tornado. There's me filming as it first span up, so you can see a vortex there behind the trees. It was a multiple vortex tornado. There's another image there. Wasn't very far away from us at this stage, and we did have to do quite an escape from this, as it took a very unusual path. And actually, I wouldn't quite say it caught us out, but it was a scary experience, and a lot of, sadly there were some fatalities that day among storm chasers. So this really hammered home how dangerous storm chasing can be if you don't, if you don't plan for something that perhaps is a little bit unforeseen. So that was a tricky situation. That was the tornado. Those lines show the outline of it a bit later on, and there was a subvortex within it that's highlighted there. I'm just going to run through a few more images now, and I'll just shout out the dates. If you have any questions about specific images, please ask them at the end. Some more images of that Canadian tornado in Texas in 2015 that I'll just show here. That was a bit like the one where I had myself in the image. This was one of the other tornadoes that occurred a little bit later on from the same storm. This is Wyoming in May 2018. Really nice image, I think, because of the green grass. I like this one because of the road going away, adding a bit of depth of field and a really nice classic tornado shape going on there. The next day, so we had a good couple of days run there. This was in Colorado, not far from a place called Cope. And these were what are colloquially referred to in the USA as landspout tornadoes. Non-mesocyclone tornado might be a better name for them. These form underneath non-rotating, deeply rotating parts of the thunderstorm. So this was under what we call the flanking line of the storm. So about 5 or 6 of these occurred. So these are a different pair that occurred over a period of about sort of 20 or 30 minutes or so. And then a little bit later, a couple of tornadoes formed out of the actual strongly rotating part of the thunderstorm. And this was one that just about approached us across a field, but we decided to get out of there, even though it was quite small or quite weak, but we didn't want to hang around to really see what it was like. So that was a busy day. Let's move on to lightning, and I'll just put up a quick couple of slides of some text that are just things I've picked up. You need a bit more planning. You need to think about camera settings. You probably want a bit of manual control over the camera for exposure, ISO, aperture, things like that. Shutter release cable can be useful. Maybe an auto release that can take pictures every few seconds. A tripod, definitely. And you'll want to set your focus to infinity to make sure, especially if you're doing it at night, it's not always easy, of course, to see what your camera is focused on. Daytime lightnings, just take lots and lots of pictures. Keep the ISO low. If the lightning is close, unless the lightning is very close, you probably need to step down the aperture because you want to do a little bit longer exposure. So you need to sort of squeeze down the aperture to make sure you don't overexpose. Some people use lightning triggers, which can be very nice. They cost from tens to hundreds of pounds. It can give you some really nice images if that's the way you want to go. Nighttime really depends on how close the lightning is. You'll probably need to get a couple of shots in. So you want quite frequent lightning, really. Otherwise, you might mess up some shots. So you want to try and get a couple in to work out what settings you need. If the lightning's distant, obviously you need more sensitivity. And if it's close, you want to reduce that sensitivity. So a few lightning pics that I've picked up over the years. This was back in 2012. This is when I really kind of started thinking about trying to get into still photography as opposed to videography. This was in Nebraska. That was also in Nebraska, I think. This was in Texas, I think, in 2016. I was inside the car at this point and left the camera outside. It is water resistant, not totally resistant. It's water resistant enough to put out in some moderate rain, but I didn't want to be out. This is perhaps my favourite lightning image I've taken. This was one single flash, if you like, that came down. Those came down all at once because I had the video of it as well. That was pretty nearby and pretty close, but that was quite fun. This was in Kansas, 2017, I think. There's some nocturnal images above Garden City, which is one of the towns in southwestern Kansas. I'll just run through a few others. I appreciate I'm skipping through quite quickly. So you've seen one lightning picture, maybe you've seen them all. So this was just out on the prairie of Kansas. So this is southwest of Dodge City, I think. Oklahoma, there's sunset. I forget, I think 2018 probably this was. So this was quite nice. Got some nice sort of annual crawlers, as we call them as well. They can be very spectacular. This was in Texas after sunset. Here on this one, but you got some mammatus clouds there as well, lit up. That was quite fun. And here you've got a bit of, well, some structure to the storm as well there, kind of gust front thing in the foreground, maybe a bit of a feeder tail actually into a supercell and some lightning there. And I've had one or two successes in the daytime. This one just happened to be a luck photograph. I pressed the shutter and the lightning occurred at that moment. So they don't occur very often. That was in Oklahoma. This was in far southwest Texas, not far from the Big Bend National Park, so quite an arid landscape. Again, I think I just lucked out a bit with that one. So if you keep pressing the shutter, of course, at some point you're gonna get the image. And with digital cameras, you know, you can kind of get away with that. Just make sure you delete all the ones you don't need afterwards. And my best ever lightning picture is coming up now. And here, unfortunately, when one of the best strikes I ever had came down in front of me, I made the somewhat amateurish problem of or mistake of leaving the lens cap on. So I never did that again after that. But I sort of was so excited that this lightning was getting close nearby. I got out, set the camera up, opened the camera exposure, the shutter, and sadly the lens cap was on. And then quickly talking about thunderstorm cloudscapes, this is essentially landscape photography. So there are all sorts of discussions and courses and things on landscape photography. You probably want to think a bit about the rule of thirds to think about how to do your photograph. You might want more sky in it. You might want more land. It depends what's in the foreground. And the rest of it is more about landscape photography. I'll leave that up for a second or two. But yeah, it's about how you want to tell the story. So just a few images. I won't worry about the times and dates here. This was Colorado. This one, this was New Mexico. I like the gate there, almost like a gateway to a supercell in the distance there. Quite like that setting. Having a road go along it like this and the fence go away, I quite like the way that led your eye down there. This was in Texas. This was an approaching cluster of supercell storms. Quite like the fact that people are just going about their daily business, perhaps not thinking about it too much. A bit later in the same day, that was in central Texas, just looking down the road at the departing supercell storm. You can see the nice billowing cumulonimbus there being sort of pushed away by the upper winds, really strong upper winds tilting that thunderstorm over. This is in Colorado. Of course, I don't advocate standing on a railway line to take a photograph. It was very obvious that this was a disused railway line. But yeah, that's one of those things that you have to take into account there. But I did like the way the lines went away into the distance. And of course, I did check each way before taking the picture, but that was very obviously a disused line at that point. And of course, this is just more of a shot to say, get the Colorado sign in there. There's not a huge amount of action going on with the cloud picture, but I quite like getting the colourful Colorado sign in there. And just a few more images here. A low down image. I wanted to try and get more foreground into this image with the storm, get the green of the crops and then the side of the road there. And just some other structures. This was a supercell. This was before that Canadian Texas tornado. This was about 20 minutes before the tornado spun up. So this was the supercell really getting itself in gear. And of course, it's always nice to get the chase vehicle into shot. This was in Texas towards sunset. Some crepuscular rays coming out there with a kind of weakish supercell updraft in the foreground. I like this one because this was a LP, low precipitation supercell, blocking out the sun, and we just got these different light rays coming out of it, the crepuscular rays, but also each of those rays was sort of giving a different color to the sky in that part of the image as well. So that was a pretty cool image. A little funnel cloud coming out the flanking line of a storm in central Kansas. And then perhaps, a favourite amongst storm chasers, and perhaps everyone in general who likes clouds, is the mammatus cloud, especially if you can get those at sunset or with a low sun angle. It will really give you a better, sort of contrast on the clouds there. That was it. I like that one. It says wrong way on the road there. If you're a storm chaser, maybe that's the right way. For everyone else, perhaps that's Kansas in 2017. I quite liked having that sign there. I sort of made when I saw the sign, I made sure I got down to get the image there. This was in Oklahoma in 2017. So this was a supercell far northwestern Oklahoma, or the western Oklahoma panhandle, actually. So really high up on the high plains, very sparsely populated out there. And one of my favorite images was this one, nice hail curtain coming down there, and a bit of an old truck running away into it there. So, that's I really like that image actually with the colors there. That was pretty cool. Colorado, big Colorado skies, a hail shaft with a road leading away into it. Bit of human interest in this one. This was, I think, east Nebraska, sorry, northeast Colorado, on the border with Nebraska. So some other storm chasers there were taking in that image of the storm on the horizon. And then, a sort of pastoral scene, looking over a lake with some cows looking at us, or some of them looking at the storm, others just taking in the evening view. I like the colours on that one. Nice rainbow image again, checked both ways, make sure there are no cars coming, but it's nice to sort of frame that with the power lines as well. Sort of leads you into the picture with that typical American road there out on the plains of Kansas. Another kind of rainbow image there, at higher elevation, hollow rainbow there with a lower sun angle. This was the back edge of a storm in Oklahoma. And a meaty supercell storm over Wyoming. That was a bit later after those Wyoming tornadoes that I showed you earlier on. It was the same storm, but about 2 hours later, that it just morphed into this big high precipitation supercell. Up in the high plains of the Texas Panhandle, this was a nice supercell just near sunset. Same day actually. Oh, I know this was in Nebraska actually. Sorry, this was a panoramic view, yeah. So stitching some images together, that can give a nice but distorted image. You always have to be careful that you make sure it's explaining that's what it is. I realize my time's going over a bit now, so I'll carry on. I'll just show some extra images here and just let the pictures do the talking through. So these are just capturing images as we went across the plains of thunderstorm phenomena. Really, this was in the mountains of southwest Texas, so really quite a different view to normal. This was near a place called Fort Stockton in Texas, and this was as the storm sort of glowered over a town. It had a tornado warning. No tornado in the end, but the sirens were blowing in the town. A stitched panoramic view there of a storm in Colorado. At sunset, some really nice color schemes there. And to sort of finish up the section, just a couple of pictures about hail. I mean, hail is almost serendipitous, really. You just need hail to occur and you take a picture of it. So this was a storm that we saw in the distance in Colorado, and then we found some hail. You can see there's some dents in the wet mud there. This is my partner's hand with some hail that was about an inch and a half in diameter. So reasonably sized. That was it all across the road. So it looked kind of quite cool. There was no one else there. It was the middle of nowhere, but you could do some nice images, a bit of a sort of bit of a foreground focus image there with some bokeh in the background. And you should always have something to measure the hail. So we can take our calipers with us so we can get a nice hail. So in the end, the biggest hail we had was just over 2 inches, which is classed as hen egg sized hail in the States. More than enough to crack your windscreen. And finally, using a phone's camera, and this is where serendipity really comes into things, where you just take pictures of if you're out and about. So I've got a 2-year-old daughter. We have a 2-year-old daughter, and so often when I'm taking her out for a walk here in Reading or South Reading, if there's some nice big skies, there's a local sort of park area that we walk to, and it affords some good views. So this was back in, I think, back in March sometime this year. Some nice towering cumulus going on there. This was just in our local road, really, just a lovely sunset view again, taken with my camera. Same park as before, nice wintry misty sunset picture, quite evocative, I think. And to sum up, to finish up, the week ago today, we flew back from Texas, and this was the view down the runway at Austin just before takeoff of a supercell just to the northwest of the airfield, which was slightly concerning knowing what that was, and it had golf ball sized hail in it, but thankfully, clearly the pilots knew that it was there. You can see it. And as soon as we got down the runway, we did a hard right turn off to the northeast and kept out of its way. Why we're in America? Well, because we went over for the eclipse, and this was my image of the end of totality that we saw in northern Arkansas at a place called Ash Flat, and that's the second diamond ring just after 4 minutes, 12 seconds of totality. The sun made a reappearance with that glorious diamond ring effect, so it was a worthwhile trip in the end. There you go. Sorry, I overran a little bit there, but I shall conclude at that point and hand back to Kirsty.
That was amazing. Thank you, Paul. Perfect. Thank you. That was really great, and obviously some fantastic images. I really loved your lightning shots as well. I think that really just captures the storm so well. The large hail, quite frightening. I'm glad I wouldn't be driving through that, seeing some of the damage that that can cause. But just really great to see, and just the fact that you say you're not an expert photographer, but I think you've taken so many great photos that hopefully it's inspired a few more.